All right, so today we're getting into some seriously intense history. The French Revolution.
Lots of drama.
Forget the, stereotypical berets and baguettes for a sec, because we're talking about a period that totally reshaped how we think about power of the people and a whole lot more.
And it's amazing how much it still resonates with us today. We're using Wikipedia as our deep dive source this time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and a really interesting online article I found to give us the need to know info
so
we can really unpack why this whole revolution went down and what it means for us centuries later.
I'm into it. So picture this. France, 1789, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette are living it up at Versailles.
Yeah, totally oblivious.
Right, completely oblivious to the turmoil that's brewing right outside their little gilded cages.
It's like a kingdom on the verge of just a complete meltdown.
And it wasn't even just one thing that set it off.
Right, it was all these different factors. Our sources both kind of agree that it was this mix of social, political, and economic factors that were about to just completely boil over.
Okay, so let's talk money, because that's usually how trouble starts.
Right.
Wikipedia is totally blunt about it.
Yeah.
France's finances were basically one massive hangover from lavish spending and all those costly wars they were fighting.
And the worst part is the everyday person, they were the ones stuck footing the bill.
Yeah.
Literally. The article we found points out that regular people were getting slammed with taxes, while the nobility and the clergy were basically just chilling. They got a free pass.
It's the oldest story in the book.
It really is.
People at the top, completely out of touch. People at the bottom are getting squeezed dry. And suddenly, questioning authority doesn't seem so radical anymore.
It's not even questioning at that point. It's a necessity. This economic inequality wasn't just unfair. It was creating this deep resentment.
Totally.
A sense that the system was fundamentally broken.
And it gets even more interesting because it went beyond just empty stomachs. Both sources mention how influential these Enlightenment thinkers were, like Voltaire, Rousseau, those guys.
Oh, yeah, those are the influencers of their day, right? But instead of makeup tutorials, they're spreading ideas about individual liberty and freedom of speech, things that were seriously revolutionary back then.
Big time. So while the monarchy's worried about their next party, the people are hey, maybe we deserve a say in how this whole thing works. And wouldn't you know, there was this little revolution going on across the pond that caught their attention.
Yeah, the American Revolution.
Give them a real-life example.
Right. Suddenly, we the people wasn't just this fancy phrase in a dusty book. It was a possibility, a model to follow.
It's 1789. The king calls this meeting of the Estates General.
Okay.
And this was not your average town hall meeting.
Right.
Imagine a system where your vote depends on if you're a priest, a nobleman, or, well, everyone else.
Which, if you're doing the math, was not exactly what you'd call fair representation.
Not at all. So the clergy and the nobility, this tiny sliver of the population, had the same voting power as 98% of everyone else in the country.
Right, the third estate.
Exactly. And unsurprisingly, they were fed up
Yeah, I can bet.
with being ignored. So they decided to take matters into their own hands. Where do they end up? A tennis court.
Of all places, right?
I know. June 17, 1789, they get locked out of their meeting hall, so they gather in this nearby indoor tennis court and make a vow that would shock France. The tennis court oath.
Bold move.
They basically said, we're not leaving until France gets a constitution.
Talk about making a statement.
Right. That's how you do it.
Definitely.
But it escalates pretty quickly from there because this defiance, this refusal to be ignored,
Yeah.
it leads to one of the most iconic moments of the entire revolution.
The storming of the Bastille.
It's the ultimate symbol.
It really is. Both of our sources spend a lot of time on this event. July 14th, 1789, the Bastille, the symbol of royal authority and oppression, becomes the target of all the people's rage.
And it's more than just tearing down walls.
Oh, absolutely.
It's about tearing down this whole idea that a king has all the power.
Right.
It's about the people seizing their moment.
And they did. The fall of the Bastille was huge for the French people. It showed them that their voices together could actually topple even the strongest symbols of power.
It's such a powerful image, right? The people storming the Bastille. But we know revolutions don't exactly go as planned.
Not usually, no.
Things get a little messy, right?
Yeah, things definitely take a turn. The revolution kind of spins into this really turbulent and honestly dark phase.
Yeah.
Wikipedia goes into a lot of detail here about the political struggles and the rise of these radical groups.
Right.
And of course that period that we call the Reign of Terror.
Yeah, things get complicated. It's not just about, getting rid of the king anymore.
Right.
We're talking about like the guillotine executions everywhere and this atmosphere of fear that just takes over.
It's a good reminder, I think, that even revolutions that are fighting for freedom can still, have their own forms of tyranny.
Yeah.
The Reign of Terror is like us having to confront this really uncomfortable truth about revolutions,
So over 16,000 people were executed by the guillotine during this time.
including the king and queen.
Wow. It's hard to even wrap your head around that level of bloodshed. Makes you think, how can something that starts with these ideals of liberty and equality go so wrong?
That's like the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's what fascinates historians and really anyone trying to understand how these things work. The motivations back then were really complex.
Right.
There was this genuine fear among a lot of the revolutionaries that like enemies of the revolution were everywhere.
Oh, wow.
So they felt like they had to take these swift and decisive actions. But of course, that escalated really quickly into this paranoia and this violence.
So how does someone like Robespierre fit into all of this? Wasn't he like a main player during the Reign of Terror?
He was. Robespierre is a really fascinating and kind of tragic figure. At first, he was all about democratic reforms. He really believed in the power of the people. But when the revolution became more chaotic, he became more ruthless.
Oh, wow.
He was convinced that this terror was the only way to, like, save the revolution and what it had accomplished.
It's like that saying, power corrupts, and absolute
Mhm.
power corrupts. Absolutely.
Exactly. He became what he was fighting against. Robespierre is a cautionary tale about how intoxicating power can be and how there's such a fine line between being really passionate about a revolution and becoming a dictator, basically. His reign of terror ended with his own execution in 1794,
Oh, wow.
which kind of marks the end of that brutal chapter in the French Revolution.
So what happened after Robespierre? Did France ever find peace?
It's not so simple. You see, France was exhausted at this point. After all this turmoil, they were really yearning for some stability.
Right.
And into this power vacuum walks a figure who we now consider synonymous with France itself.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon. Our online article, I thought, did a great job kind of summarizing his rise. You have the military genius, the ambition, the whole dramatic arc of it all. It's almost like something out of Shakespeare.
Right. Total drama.
It really is. Napoleon was a brilliant strategist, a military prodigy who led France to victory after victory all across Europe,
Yeah, he really expanded the French Empire.
like no one had ever seen before.
But it wasn't just about conquering places, was it? He did other things too.
Yeah, you're right. That's what makes him so interesting. Napoleon wasn't just about military power, he was a reformer. He brought in a new legal code. He made big changes to education. He created a centralized government.
Wow.
He understood that real power wasn't just about taking over other countries, but about shaping them.
He was playing the long game.
Exactly. But in the end, his ambition led to his downfall.
Of course. It always does.
He just kept reaching for more, and in 1812, he made a really bad decision to invade Russia.
Oh, yeah, that was a disaster.
The whole campaign was a disaster. It decimated the French army, and that's really the beginning of the end for Napoleon. He's finally defeated at Waterloo in 1815, and his empire collapses.
A classic Greek tragedy.
Right, the hero brought down by his own ego. But his story really connects back to the French Revolution in a lot of ways.
How so?
Think about it. Napoleon's rise wouldn't have happened without the revolution.
That's true.
It created everything he needed to rise to power. A lack of leadership, a desire for someone strong to take charge, and this longing for things to just be stable again.
It's like the revolution created the conditions for its own kind of demise.
It's true. By dismantling the old system, it made way for a new one that, in a lot of ways, ended up looking a lot like the system it
It's
replaced.
kind of ironic.
It really is. Revolutions often result in these figures who come in and promise to bring back order, but oftentimes that order comes at the cost of the very freedoms that the revolution was fighting for.
That's a really good point. It's a good reminder that revolutions are messy and unpredictable. They're full of consequences that no one sees coming.
Absolutely. But even though Napoleon's reign ended, the impact of the French Revolution was felt far beyond France.
Oh, I bet.
It's like ripples in a pond, you
Here's
know?
some breads out.
The effects of that one event, the storming of the Bastille, went outward, influencing other revolutions and reforms across Europe and really the world.
So even though the French Revolution had its ups and downs, it's clear that its ideas had a huge impact. But why should we even care today?
Yeah.
It's not like we're all going to grab our pitchforks and storm Buckingham Palace or something.
Maybe not storming palaces literally, but the French Revolution has some really relevant lessons for us, even now in the 21st century.
Like what?
Well, it reminds us that anyone in power, whether it's a king or a government, even a big company, they get their power from the people they rule.
Right.
And when the people say enough is enough, when they feel ignored or unheard, things can change. They have to change.
It makes you think about everything that's going on in the world right now,
You're
right?
right.
With all the social and political stuff happening, do you think we're in a moment where those old ideas about liberty and equality are like back in the spotlight?
100%. Look at all the movements we see demanding social justice and economic fairness and better representation in government.
Right.
Those are all connected to the ideals that were at the heart of the French Revolution. This fight for a fairer society never really ends.
Wow, it's like we're all part of this revolution that started centuries ago.
In a way, we are. The French Revolution showed us that history isn't just a straight line.
It's more complicated than that.
Way more complicated. It's more like a cycle of progress and then setbacks, revolutions, and restorations.
And then more revolutions.
Right. And it's our job, each generation, to figure out what we believe in and to fight for it and to learn from the mistakes that came before us.
So true. Speaking of learning from the past, here's something to think about. Both of our sources this time really emphasize how the French Revolution, even with all the craziness and the violence, it changed the relationship between a government and its people forever.
It was a total turning point.
So the big question is, what issues do we have today that might seem small now but could become huge problems later on?
That's the question, isn't
Or like
it?
climate change or social injustice, or even just how divided we all seem politically. Could any of those become the next French Revolution? And how can we as people, as a society, deal with these things before they blow up?
Those are really important questions. The French Revolution ultimately reminds us that we're not just watching history unfold, we're a part of it.
We're writing it every day.
Exactly. We have the power to shape the world around us.
And on that note, we'll let you think about all those revolutions, both the big ones and the small ones, that are still shaping our world today. Until next time, keep diving deep and never stop questioning.